We begin tonight with an extraordinary shadow report filtering through the gilded gates of Buckingham Palace. A quiet coup has unfolded at the pinnacle of the British monarchy, a silent overthrow that threatens to tear apart a thousand-year-old dynasty. This is no political debate. It is an internal war waged with soft whispers, cold glances, and broken oaths behind heavy oak doors. Tonight, the grand facade of royal stability has completely shattered, exposing a ruthless battle for absolute influence between those who guard the crown with selfless duty and a scheming cabal determined to bend its power to their own ambitious will. The explosion erupted in the grand ballroom during a high-stakes state banquet designed to project national strength and seamless unity. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a radiant glow over visiting foreign heads of state and senior diplomats. Yet the atmosphere was stifling, heavy with an agonizing dread. At the head table sat Princess Anne, the unyielding fortress of the house, a heroic pillar of selfless devotion who had spent decades serving the throne without demanding praise. Beside her sat King Charles, a sovereign paralyzed between his sacred constitutional oath and his fatal personal vulnerabilities. Every detail of the evening had been meticulously calibrated. The seating plan, personally authorized by the king hours earlier, explicitly omitted Queen Camilla, following a vicious private feud. Anne had demanded a binding pledge from her brother. The queen consort would be barred from the hall. Then, the unbelievable occurred. While the grand entrance doors remained locked, a hidden side passage deep within the palace walls swung open. Orchestrated by treasonous palace insiders and manipulative courtiers aligned with Camilla's faction, the queen consort made her move. Stepping out of the shadows, she glided across the polished parquet floor with a cold, predatory confidence. She ignored the astonished stares of foreign dignitaries, marched directly toward the royal table, and claimed the empty chair beside King Charles, a seat that was never meant for her. The entire hall froze in terror. The orchestra's final note hung in the air like an executioner's blade. All eyes locked onto the king. Princess Anne turned toward her brother, searching his pale face for a single non-verbal command, a raised hand, or any gesture confirming he would honor his word and defend his royal decree. Painful seconds stretched into eternity. Charles's hands trembled visibly against the white tablecloth, his breathing shallow, his eyes wide with panic. The king sat utterly helpless, trapped in a devastating moment of cowardice between his scheming wife and the stern sister staring through his soul. He offered no command. He uttered no word. In that agonizing silence, the sovereign surrendered his authority. Anne did not raise her voice. She did not summon the guards or indulge in a public outburst. Her discipline was absolute. Instead, her quiet retribution delivered a mortal blow to the king's prestige. Slowly, with terrifying composure, the princess stood up. The sharp scrape of her chair against the marble floor rang out like a gunshot through the silent hall. She reached down, lifted her folded place card, and set it down precisely beside Charles's trembling hand. Holding his gaze for one final, agonizing moment, her eyes communicated a searing truth. Camilla had committed treason against the arrangement, but it was the monarch who had betrayed the crown. Prince William, observing the disaster from across the table, watched in horror as his aunt turned her back and walked out, leaving an empty seat that resembled an open grave at the center of the state dinner. He looked at his father, who stared blankly at the discarded place card like a man condemned. Around them, the illusion of majesty dissolved. Foreign leaders whispered behind silk napkins, servants froze with silver trays, and Camilla remained in her stolen chair with a triumphant, cold stillness. William recognized instantly that this was no sudden fit of temper. It was the explosive climax of a dark saga rooted in an ancient wound, a shattered oath, and a fatal warning that King Charles had recklessly ignored. To comprehend why Princess Anne executed this devastating walkout, one must look behind the velvet curtain into the secretive corridors where this confrontation was forged. This was never a trivial dispute over seating. It was an existential war for control of the monarchy. Anne had spent a lifetime defending the institution through stoic sacrifice, while Camilla had fought for decades to conquer her place within it. Caught between them stood Charles, a king incapable of governing his own household. And as the state banquet descended into ruin, the roots of this historic collapse pointed directly back 3 days earlier, to a fiery confrontation behind the closed doors of Windsor Castle. 3 days before the state banquet collapsed into public ruin, The true seeds of this royal schism were planted within the ancient, stone-walled fortress of Windsor Castle. The gathering had been arranged under the guise of a routine tactical briefing to finalize diplomatic protocols. But inside the private drawing room, the air was suffocating, heavy with hidden threats and intense psychological combat. King Charles sat at the end of a long mahogany table, flanked by Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, both maintaining a vigilant, uneasy silence. Across from them stood Princess Anne, her posture rigid as iron, holding the official seating ledger like a sacred, unbreakable covenant. But Queen Camilla had no intention of abiding by precedent. Driven by a desperate determination to secure her absolute supremacy over the royal court, the queen consort issued a direct challenge to the crown's traditional hierarchy. She demanded the primary ceremonial seat assigned to Anne, insisting that the sovereign's wife must never sit secondary to his sister at an international gathering. The atmosphere inside the chamber turned sub-zero. Princess Anne did not flinch. With slow, lethal grace, she slid the approved seating ledger back across the polished wood toward her brother. In a tone cold enough to paralyze every courtier standing in the shadows, Anne declared that the crown was an instrument of selfless national service, not an arena for personal vanity or aristocratic ambition. Camilla retaliated instantly, her eyes flashing with anger as she framed her potential exclusion as a deliberate, hostile demotion designed to strip her of royal legitimacy in the eyes of foreign powers. As the two women locked eyes in an agonizing stalemate, Prince William recognized the terrifying scope of the crisis. This was no petty squabble over silk-upholstered chairs, but a bitter battle for the soul of the monarchy and control over the king's fragile authority. Trapped between the sister who embodied the throne's historic integrity and the wife who demanded total emotional submission, King Charles crumbled beneath the psychological pressure. Desperate to prevent an open revolt before foreign dignitaries arrived, the monarch executed a desperate, binding compromise. In a hushed, recorded pledge, witnessed by senior palace advisors, Charles gave his absolute word to Princess Anne. Camilla would be strictly barred from attending the banquet, and the original seating arrangement would remain untouched. Camilla departed the drawing room in absolute silence, leaving behind a dark, lingering aura of menace that signaled the fight was far from over. That broken promise echoed with terrifying clarity 3 days later, as the grand doors of the Buckingham Palace ballroom closed behind Princess Anne. Leaving the banquet hall in total solitude, the princess retreated into the quiet chill of the private corridor leading toward the sovereign's staircase. Her fists were clenched at her sides, her chest rising and falling in controlled breathing as she processed her brother's public cowardice. But before she could reach the stairs, a heavy oak door creaked open behind her. Queen Camilla emerged alone from the shadows, devoid of her usual retinue of aides and ladies-in-waiting, her face pale with fury. For the first time that evening, the two most powerful women in the realm stood face to face in total isolation, separated by no protocol or formal decorum. "You knew the agreement," Anne said, her voice dropping into a deadly register that echoed off the high gilded ceilings. Camilla did not step back. Gliding forward until her diamond tiara caught the dim hallway light, the queen consort delivered her aggressive justification. She declared that she would never ask permission to stand beside her husband, claiming that Anne's insistence on excluding her was a calculated plot to render her powerless within the palace walls. Anne's eyes narrowed into slits of ice. She countered that the true humiliation was not Camilla's ambition, but the tragic reality that the king's word no longer carried weight inside his own palace. It was at that precise moment that Camilla exposed the full magnitude of her intrigue. She revealed that her grand entrance through the side passage was no impulsive action. Hours before the banquet, she had covertly issued a private authorization, an internal royal command, forcing a compromised senior household official to bypass security protocol and unlock the hidden doors for her arrival. The revelation hung between them like a death sentence. Camilla had not merely breached a family pact, she had engineered a covert palace operation that directly undermined the sovereign's command structure. Before Anne could reply, a tall shadow fell across the carpet. Prince William emerged from the end of the corridor, his face dark with suppressed rage and bitter understanding. Looking from the queen consort to his aunt, the heir to the throne delivered a cold, imperative message directly from the king. Both women were ordered to cease their confrontation instantly and report to the king's private sitting room for an immediate palace tribunal. The heavy oak doors of the king's private sitting room clicked shut with an ominous finality, sealing out the muffled echoes of orchestral music playing in the distant banquet hall. Inside, the air was dense, heavy with the suffocating weight of an institutional execution. King Charles sat behind his dark mahogany desk, his face haggard and lined with profound exhaustion. On one side stood Princess Anne, an unshakable figure of stoic righteousness, her expression carved from cold granite. On the other stood Queen Camilla, her posture rigid, her eyes burning with desperate defiance as she fought to maintain her grip on royal supremacy. Between them, Prince William stood like a silent sentinel of the future, holding a black leather document folder that contained the absolute evidence of treason within the household. For several agonizing seconds, no one spoke. The silence was deafening, broken only by the steady, rhythmic ticking of a gilded carriage clock on the marble mantelpiece. Charles looked from his sister to his wife, trapped in the ultimate nightmare of his reign. He possessed the formal authority to banish Camilla from the residence, enforce Anne's demands, or command both women to put on a false smile and return to the banquet table. Yet every potential path carried a devastating cost. Defending Camilla meant sacrificing the trust of the sister who had shielded the monarchy through every modern storm. Standing with Anne meant publicly humiliating his wife and exposing the total collapse of his own domestic authority. "You must return to the hall, Anne," Charles finally whispered, his voice trembling with a desperate, pleading weakness. "For the dignity of the crown, for the foreign delegates." Princess Anne did not step backward. Her reply was swift, cold, and utterly relentless. The dignity of the crown was surrendered the moment a solemn oath was traded for cowardice, she declared, her tone cutting through the king's fragile defense like a steel blade. "I will not sit beside a woman who breaches palace security to satisfy her personal vanity, nor will I participate in a theatrical lie to protect a monarch who cannot honor his word." Camilla retaliated with venomous intensity, stepping forward and turning on her husband with a fierce ultimatum of her own. "If you allow her to cast me out tonight, Charles, you signal to the world that I am a secondary figure in your reign," she hissed, her fingers gripping the edge of the desk. "You are the king. Assert your authority or admit that your sister governs this house." Before Charles could yield to the emotional pressure, Prince William stepped forward, placing the black leather folder onto the center of the mahogany desk. The sharp slap of the binder against the wood echoed like a gavel in a courtroom. "It is no longer a matter of opinion or family feeling," William said, his voice terrifying in its calm, calculated precision. "The palace security logs have been fully audited. 2 hours ago, a direct command bearing the Queen Consort's private authorization was delivered to the master of the household. The side passage was opened deliberately to bypass the approved guest list and defy the sovereign's explicit decree." William looked directly at his father, his eyes communicating an unwritten truth. The heir to the throne would not tolerate a palace ruled by deceit. King Charles stared down at the security log, the final hope of denial collapsing within him. Slowly, with trembling hands, he reached into his breast pocket and produced Princess Anne's folded place card, the very card she had left on the banquet table moments earlier. He laid it gently beside the security report, facing the brutal, undeniable reality of his betrayal. The balance of power, preserved for generations through strict duty and unquestioned order, shifted irrevocably in that quiet room. The king looked up at Camilla, his eyes devoid of warmth, replaced by a dark, heavy authority born of total cornering. "The order stands," Charles pronounced, his voice suddenly hard. "You will leave the banquet hall immediately and retire to your private quarters. The official who executed your unauthorized access will be suspended before midnight." Camilla recoiled as if struck, her face draining of color as the collapse of her ambition materialized before her eyes. The victory she had sought in taking the forbidden seat had transformed into an absolute, historic humiliation. Without another word, her eyes fixed in a stare of bitter defeat, the queen consort turned and exited through the private side door, escorted by security into immediate isolation. Justice had triumphed over conspiracy, but its price was catastrophic. Princess Anne inclined her head slightly toward her brother, not in celebration, but in grim recognition of a duty bitterly fulfilled. The battle behind closed doors was over, but as Charles prepared to face the world alone, the kingdom was about to witness the true, devastating aftermath of a broken crown. As the first gray light of dawn broke over the spires of London, a heavy, suffocating silence settled across Buckingham Palace. The violent, emotional storm of the previous night had passed, But the structural landscape of the British monarchy was altered forever. In the cold morning light, the grand ballroom, once illuminated by brilliant crystal chandeliers and filled with international power brokers, stood empty, its polished floors bearing the invisible scars of an institutional catastrophe. Outside the high perimeter walls, the court circular would publish its routine, sanitized bulletin, maintaining the desperate public fiction that state business had proceeded with immaculate majesty. But behind the iron gates, the illusion had permanently shattered. The palace staff moved in hushed terror, aware that they had witnessed not merely a fiery family quarrel, but a devastating administrative purge, a quiet, ruthless resetting of the royal hierarchy that left every participant in this drama irrevocably changed. For Queen Camilla, the dawn brought the bitter, absolute reality of total institutional exile. The grand ambition that had fueled her decades-long ascent within the royal firm had collapsed in a single evening of reckless overreach. By direct command of the sovereign's newly enforced directive, her private executive office was systematically stripped of all administrative authority over state dinners, seating protocols, and internal palace security clearances. The compromised courtiers, shadowy advisors, and palace insiders who had facilitated her secret entrance through the side passage were quietly purged from service before breakfast, their careers permanently destroyed. Confined to her private apartments, surrounded by silent walls, and completely stripped of operational influence, the queen consort was forced to face the brutal consequence of her gamble. She retained her title and her crown, but the real power she had fought so fiercely to claim had dissolved into dust, leaving her an isolated prisoner of royal protocol within the very palace she had sought to command. King Charles found himself imprisoned in a dark, fatalistic reality of his own making. The sovereign who had spent a lifetime striving to balance personal affection with constitutional duty had ultimately lost the moral authority of both. Sitting alone in his private library as the metropolis awakened, the king carried the crushing weight of a severely diminished legacy. His disastrous hesitation at the banquet table had exposed a fatal vulnerability in his leadership, a tragic indecision that the court, the government, and his family would never forget. Though he had ultimately signed the executive orders stripping his wife's office of power, the act provided no emotional redemption. He was now a monarch reigning under the vigilant, unyielding scrutiny of his own house, his personal word no longer accepted without legal verification, his authority permanently audited by those who had saved him from total public disgrace. The crown rested heavily upon his brow, not as a symbol of absolute authority, but as a tragic reminder that a king who betrays his own word becomes a captive of his own throne. Out of the ashes of this historic collapse, a cold and formidable new order of authority emerged. Prince William stepped into the inner machinery of royal governance with an icy, uncompromising resolve, assuming a heavy burden of responsibility over the dynasty's future trajectory. The crisis had burned away any remaining youthful idealism, transforming the heir into a vigilant guardian of institutional discipline who would ensure that personal emotion would never again threaten the throne's stability. Standing beside him was Princess Anne, the ultimate victor of this silent war, whose stoic devotion to duty had forced the monarchy to realign with its founding principles. She requested no formal praise, sought no public glory, and allowed herself no victorious declarations. Returning immediately to her relentless schedule of public engagements without offering a single word of commentary to the press, the princess assumed the grueling responsibility of keeping the crown upright, proving that true power in a kingdom rests not in titles or proximity, but in absolute, unyielding loyalty to the institution. History does not preserve empires for their romantic myths, but for their cold, fatalistic capacity to survive internal subversion and enforce order within their own ranks. The empty chair left at the head table of the state banquet will echo through the halls of Buckingham Palace for centuries, a silent, chilling monument to the night when duty drew an unbreachable line against personal ambition. The dynasty endured the shockwave, but the true cost of its survival was exacted in shattered trust, ruined alliances, and the permanent loss of domestic peace at the highest level of the state. The crown remains standing, cold and unyielding, sustained only by those willing to sacrifice everything to preserve its ancient weight. Thank you for following this exclusive, multi-part investigation into the secretive shadows of royal power. If you found this documentary compelling, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more breaking analyses of historic power shifts.